Andariel's Flurry build is better than ever. Here you can see me easily carrying a 4-man party in Lilith, killing her in just a few seconds. Here I'm instantly killing Duriel in less than 1 stagger, again in a 4-man party, carrying them. This build can do billions of damage per tick in a T135 pit run, finishing it in about 7.5 minutes. This build can also do T120 speed runs in about 2.5 minutes that you'll see here. This is a really fun run, and in this guide I'll be telling you about the changes that I've made to this build to further optimize it to make it run and play just that much better. And part of that is, of course, the buffs that you may have heard about. It just got a 50% buff, and there are some other changes that went into the latest hotfix that is now live. It does actually work, so go try that out, and we'll talk about how those changes are going to affect the build, such as the gear and the Paragon, and how we can optimize these things in order to be just a bit better. And if you haven't seen the previous build guide, I would definitely recommend checking that out first, because that's going to go over the basics of the build and how it works. And this build is not going to go over everything again, but it's going to just kind of talk about the changes that I've made, and that way it's a little less redundant from the previous video. And there are a good amount of changes. There's not a ton, but there's definitely some noteworthy ones that are going to change up the build and the playstyle just a little bit, but not a whole lot. So we'll talk about things such as the Paragon board has been changed and updated a bit in order to get some more damage on there, but also make the gearing requirements a little bit easier. And also we'll talk about some changes that I've made to the actual gear in order to help stagger bosses faster, which really helps for higher pit runs. And I'll also talk about a new variant that is going to really try to maximize damage for those who want to either speed run a bit faster or push those pits a bit higher. And I'll also tell you guys about a resource that you can use that has the updates for things like the change log and how you can use that in order to see future changes. And here we can see the boss that I just reached, and we can see just how long this takes to kill a T120 boss. So we can see the damage numbers ramp up pretty quick there. And I'll also tell you guys a bit about how to fight bosses a little bit more efficiently, and how to play around some of the new things like the new glyph that we just got. Alright, so first off, let's talk about the hotfix and the changes that went in briefly here. So first off, the Andariel's Helm, the 50% buff did go in, so it now does 27,570 damage over the 5 seconds, and I've tested this, confirmed it, it did go in. We are now doing 50% more damage. Second thing briefly here is that the Poison Nova, which was bugged initially, it does actually spawn on the enemy now, so we can be far away and it will still spawn on them, not on us. Another thing that they changed was in the Paragon, they made it so that the affixes later on are easier to get. So you can see here that even on my last board, I'm able to get the rare nodes now. So that's a really nice change, and because of that, I am making an additional change here, which is allowing me to pick up these all resist nodes. So before I wasn't able to get the 6%, as I'm only able to get 3% all elements. And because of that, I can now drop on my chest piece here. I was able to drop the all resist on it, which allowed me to instead pick up dexterity or max life or whatever it was that you are missing there instead. Another change is they changed the Fluidity glyph. So the Fluidity glyph now actually gives us 10% more damage when we use an agility skill. So we're swapping out Chip and we're putting in Fluidity, which is going to give us this nice 10% buff. And it's also going to give us other bonuses as well because we are putting it on the No Witness board, which is going to give us more max life and a little bit more damage from the 15% damage and 21 int and things like that. So this is a really nice change, but we do need to play around this a little bit. Okay, so this is an agility skill that needs to be used. So we take things such as Shadow Step. This is an agility skill. You can see the tag in green there, agility. Also, Caltrops is also an agility skill. And notice Fluidity, it lasts for 6 seconds, which is almost the full length of a Stagger. So what I like to do when I'm, say, fighting a boss is I want to make sure that this buff is up when it staggers. So basically I would throw down Caltrops, I would start attacking, and then right as that stagger bar is about to reach the stagger, I use Shadow Step, which then is going to give me the buff for the whole time. And another change to mention along with that is I put Shadow Step to stun the target for 2 seconds. And this is going to allow us to stagger faster, but it also pairs up really nicely to make sure that we can actually use this to stagger the boss. So what I like to do is when it gets really close to about to be staggered, that's when I'll Shadow Step. Shadow Step will finish the stagger, and then I can start my rotation in order to maximize my damage during the stagger phase. This is really important to do. Another change in the Paragon is I'm taking Deadly Ambush. And Deadly Ambush, it tells us that it deals 23% increased critical strike damage to enemies affected by your trap skills. And normally you would think that this would only work if the skill critical strikes. And what was recently discovered was that Deadly Ambush actually works for all damage. So you don't even need a critical strike. This is a bug. I expect this will be fixed in a later patch, maybe. I'm guessing this has probably been this way since the beginning of launch, but who knows. So basically this works for our poison damage. So we can take this and we just need to make sure the enemies are in our traps in order to get more value out of this. I've also rearranged the boards a little bit, as you can see here. Definitely check out the Max Roll Planner for the different variations of this. I've also created a variation for those who want to keep their all-res roll on their gear. So if you don't want to get rid of that, or you can't get rid of it, you still can, instead of taking this, you can take these nodes. And I have a variation. If you click on max roll on like the bottom, there's like, you'll see the little variations down here. Just click that and there's a using all res variation that will show you how to pick these up if you need help with that. And then we do this one more time, and the third one takes a little bit longer than the first two, I believe, but not a whole lot longer. It's still very fast. And then after 3 staggers, then all of the other staggers take the same amount of time, and it's much longer. So you'll see as I start attacking, now you'll notice that stagger bar goes up very slowly. And in high pushes, this can make a really big difference. And depending on your setup, this stagger bar might take like 60 or 70 seconds, or if you have the right tempers, you can get this down to like around like 42 seconds. So what I have set up here is kind of the optimal setup for staggering really fast. Again, you don't really need this unless you're pushing high pits. But basically what it comes down to is you want to get one of each of the different types of tempers. The daze temper you can see I have on my chest. On gloves I have freeze. Pants I have immobilize, and boots I have stun. And it actually really doesn't matter what percent chance you have on these, so I would not recommend masterwork critting on any of these, and don't even really worry about the percent, and you're still gonna get maximum stagger. Because I did a lot of testing with stagger, and what I found out was pretty interesting is that there seems to be a maximum amount of stagger per second that you can get from each type of crowd control effect, or what I really should say is each source of crowd control. So notice here I have daze here, and on my boots I also have daze, but it's through the aspect. So this ends up counting as two different sources of daze. So this will have its own individual kind of max stagger amount. So basically it'll work with this daze. And the point of this is that if you have multiple of the same source of stagger, so for example if I had daze on my chest and daze on my gloves, then the second daze would not make me stagger any faster. So because of that, I only want to have one of each source of stagger. And just as a kind of interesting side note is you really have to test each of these individually, because what I found out is, for example, concussive, which dazes, and manglers, which also dazes, these do not work together. So if you have both of them, then it's not going to help you stagger any more than if you just have one of them. All right, so now that we've looked at the changes, let's talk about how we can use this build optimally. And we're going to look at this in some clips from a T138 run that I did today. And I'll give you guys some strategies that you can use in order to make your engagements a bit cleaner, a little bit faster, and how you can also fight the boss a little bit better. My favorite way to engage a pack of mobs is simply by running up to the elite pack, drop caltrops, and then drop poison trap on them, stand still, and start doing damage. And this will maximize our damage while the mobs are not unstoppable. If you attack first and then drop caltrops, well then all that time that you're jumping backwards during caltrops, you are essentially wasting because they are frozen. So when the mobs are frozen or stunned, you want to make sure that you are doing damage during that time. Barrier mobs, you want to focus those down quickly and first to get them out of the way. And again, we can see here I run up to this elite pack, I drop down caltrops, and then I try to stand still and do damage. And the reason I try to stand still is to maximize our inner calm buff, which gives us 30% more damage while we're standing still for 3 seconds. So try not to move as much as possible, except when you need to of course dodge things and survive. Alright, let's look at bosses and some tips there. So what you'll notice is that when I engage, I drop down caltrops and I don't immediately start to attack. I'll typically try to keep the mob in caltrops for a little bit, or if they summon mobs, I usually like to wait until they summon the mobs. And that's because it's going to give me more value out of bursting venoms, and it's going to allow me to get more stacks of the caltrops debuff, making them take even more damage. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm really trying to maximize my damage whenever I have a chance to stagger, because that's when most of our damage is going to be done, and we're going to get those really big damage bursts. So now the boss is about to be staggered again here, and there's a few things I want to make sure. So one, I want to make sure that the boss is in caltrops, so if I need to refresh that, I'll refresh that. Secondly, I want to make sure that I have both Poison Trap up and Shadow Step, so that as it's about to get staggered, I drop Poison Trap and then I finish the stagger with Stun, with the Shadow Step. And then I stand still and I go into my damage spamming Puncture and Flurry. All right, let's talk about the variations and who I think that they're good for. So first off, we have the Andy starter build. This is for anyone who's just getting started with the build and you want a build that can kind of play itself. You don't really have to worry about too much about the mechanics and it's relatively easy to gear for. The second one here is for people who want to have a bit more of an optimized setup here. It's a bit harder to gear for, but it can do all of the content very easily. And this is the one that I'd probably recommend for most people if you have some experience with Rogue. And then we have the Pit Pusher, the easy mode. This is for those who want to push pits and you want to have a setup that is still relatively easy to make. The gearing isn't very hard. Then we have the Pit Pusher hard Giga Pushing. This is for those who really want to try to push as high as possible, and this is harder to gear for. And honestly, the difference between these two, it's probably like 2 tiers or so. So it's not like a huge difference, maybe 3 tiers. But if you really want to go for that, this one's going to be a bit harder to gear for. Let's talk about this one here because this is kind of the new variation that I put together here that is really to maximize our DPS. All right, let's talk about this in game. So there's a few things that we use here. So first off, you'll notice that I am using dexterity gems. So it's going to give me 500 more dexterity, which is going to give me even more damage. And because of that, you'll notice that my health is relatively low. So I only have about 28,000 life before using any sort of potions. And what I also have though is I have a lot of defense through dodge. So this is a really high dodge chance variation. You'll notice that I have a temper roll and an affix roll dodge on there. And then on my chest, I have more dodge, another 10% dodge there. On my boots, I have another 11% dodge here. On my amulet, I wish I had the dodge temper, but unfortunately I don't. I only have max life here. And then because of that, I have a lot of dodge because Dex gives us dodge as well. You can see I get 27% additive dodge chance from Dex. And with all of this in mind, I have 74.3% dodge. And another thing that we use to give us some synergy with dodge is on the pant, instead of using might, I am using assimilation, which gives me 8% more added dodge to this, which is very powerful because it is additive dodge. It simply adds on to this value here. And also, it gives us Fortify, so we're dodging a lot, so my Fortify bar is typically full here, and Fortify got a buff in the recent patch that makes it give us 15% damage reduction instead of 10% damage reduction. So with this in mind, this gives us a lot of survivability. And because we're dodging so much as an indirect defensive buff, this also helps with Umbrus. So Umbrus gives us free Dark Shrouds, and every time we get hit, the Dark Shroud goes off. And the thing is that if we dodge the attack, well, then that Dark Shroud doesn't go off. So this allows us to keep these stacks high more often, which gives us a lot of added survivability. So while it seems like my life is low, all of this dodge chance, keeping up our Umbrus easier and keeping up our Fortify easier, this ends up adding a whole lot of survivability, and a lot of times I actually kind of feel in a way more tanky with this setup than my other max life setup. So I definitely recommend this setup, but again, it is harder to build for because you need these dodge rolls, which are a lot harder to get than the max life rolls. But check it out if you want to. It's a lot of fun. If you're just wondering kind of what my gear is at, I'll kind of hover over it real quickly here so you can see it's mostly 2 greater affixes at this point. Got a few upgrades, which were nice. And the main thing to really focus on along with those greater affixes that's actually more important than them is really the tempers. So make sure you get really good tempers on your gear, and that will go a really long way. Also, another thing to note is that the Paragon board is a little bit different in the Gigapush setup here. In the exploit weakness board, I end up taking this route, which gives us some damage nodes here, but we lose these vulnerability, the DR versus vulnerable enemies section here. And this was an idea that I got from Sanctum, and so shout out to Sanctum, thanks for the idea. And this allows us to save some points instead of routing around this way. And by doing that, it saves us some points, which allows us to pick up some more crowd control damage nodes here for some extra damage. And then in our skill tree, we also take the freeze node here for caltrops. You could take this if you want. This is just optimal for decreasing stagger times a little bit more, which again is really nice if you're really trying to push high. And I just want to take a moment to address a few questions that I get a lot of. So first off, crossbow or bow? So this is probably the #1 question that I get. So people realize that, hey, bow damage to distance enemies doesn't really do much versus crossbow has the implicit for vulnerable damage. So yes, the vulnerable damage is going to give you a bit more damage. It's going to give you around like 1.5% more damage, and that is nice. So why do I take bow? I take bow because caltrops uses your bow attack speed to determine how fast it drops. So by using caltrops with a bow, it deploys faster than if I have a crossbow and I deploy it. So for me, that's a big deal. For you, maybe it's not a big deal. So really either one is fine. Test it out, see what you like. Second thing, can we use Doombringer? So Doombringer just got a buff, and if you want a nice cushy easy kind of experience where you have lots of max life and DR and you don't really got to worry about dying at all, take Doombringer. It is pretty powerful. That being said, it is not optimal. It is not what I would run personally if you're trying to really push or do things as fast as possible. But again, try it out. It works pretty dang well. And X-Files, people ask me, can I use that? The answer is no. It is a unique that sucks. It doesn't do much damage. It will not proc much. It will not proc Andes. Andes cannot proc X-Files. And it has really bad stats because it's a unique item and unique items need a lot of love. So don't use X-Files. And a lot of people ask me about Heartseeker. Can I now use Heartseeker instead of Puncture? And I'll tell you based on the calculations, it's just going to be a worse setup. You can do it. It will work just fine for speed runs. If you like using Heartseeker, you want a little bit of a range play style, go for it. It'll be fun. That being said, if you want a more optimal setup, and the setup that I prefer is Puncture. So it's kind of up to you what you want to do. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you guys got a lot of useful information that's going to help you guys out with your runs. If you guys like this content, feel free to hit the like and subscribe button. That way you can get more of this type of content later on in the future. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.